Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing a man named Kim Tae-Hyun. This is a South Korean man who murdered 3 women from the same family, a mother and her 2 daughters, in one of the country's most appalling stalker cases. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, like this week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. So let's go ahead and get into this video. This video is on a case out of South Korea, and in researching this case, I realized that I've actually never done a case out of South Korea. I didn't realize that that was the case, but once I started researching this case, I was like, I definitely haven't done a case out of South Korea before, because if I had, I would remember it, because in looking into this case, the research portion was very unique. It appears that in South Korea, the names and images of victims is not released to the public for privacy reasons, and oftentimes even the perpetrator's face and name isn't released to the media and to the public, unless it is a very extreme case, and this is a very extreme case. But all that is to say that I'm going to tell you everything that happened here and what Kim did to the best of my ability based on what is available, keeping in mind that not everything is published and also that there's like a language barrier here. So I can tell you what happened, but I can't tell you anything about these women, this mother and these daughters, because I have no idea who they even are. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to, and at the end of this video I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case, but of course I want you to answer once you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this: do you believe that Kim Tae-Hyun deserved the death penalty for what he did in this case? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of Kim Tae-Hyun, a man who murdered 3 women from the same family, a mother and her 2 daughters. Our story today begins with a call to police in March of 2021, and this led officers to an apartment in Nam-gyu. It's Nowon-GU, Nam-gyu, and this is in northeastern South Korea. Now, this is the point where it would be worth it to mention to you that, like, I'm doing my best and my pronunciation might not be the best, but truly all a person can do is try the best that they can, and that is what I'm doing here. So if I get it messed up, which is very likely, I am so sorry, but I am trying. Anyways, police arrived at this apartment complex because they received a call from a friend of one of the women who lived in this apartment who had become worried when they hadn't heard from their friend in a couple of days, and that was very unlike them to not be in communication. When police enter this apartment, they find a terrible scene. They find the bodies of 3 women, and they were all deceased. And I don't know the names of these women, as I said in the beginning, and I don't know how old they were, but from context clues and things that I read, it seems like the youngest of the 3 was in her early 20s, the middle, the older daughter, was in her mid-20s, and the mother, I have no idea how old she was, but all 3 of them were deceased. All 3 of them had suffered stab wounds to their necks, and all 3 of them appeared to have been dead for a little while by the time they were found. Inside the home, they also found the women's murderer. This was Kim Tae-Hyun, and he was suffering from multiple self-inflicted wounds to his wrists, his stomach, and his own neck. So he was rushed to the hospital because, you know, he had to be treated for his injuries because he was still alive. And once he was there and like awake and able to talk, they also found that he was willing to talk and tell police what happened. And what he told police is that he became infatuated with the eldest daughter in the family, so the girl in the middle, the eldest daughter, and that he became interested in her, he became obsessed with her, he stalked her, he got her address, and he went to her home, dressed in a disguise, gained access to the home, killed her little sister, killed her mother, then killed her, okay, and then stayed in the house for 2 days with their bodies, sleeping in their beds, drinking their beer, eating their food. And then finally, when he heard police coming, he tried to take his own life. So let's talk about what we know about how we got here. So what we know about Kim that has been reported is as follows. He was born in 1996. He was 24 years old at the time the murders were committed. He didn't have a job at this time, so he spent most of his time just doing whatever he wanted. And one of the things he really liked to do was play video games. So he spent most of his days off. Yes, most of his days were spent playing video games at a PC cafe, which is like an internet cafe. I don't know, I didn't actually look this up, but I don't know if like having internet in your home is common in South Korea, because I feel like I've heard of like internet cafes often when it comes to South Korea. Not that I like looking to South Korea often, but I feel like I've made that connection more than once in my mind. If you know, you can put it in the comments. But either way, he spent most of his days in this PC cafe playing video games online. And reportedly, this is how he met the eldest daughter in this case, the girl who would go on to be the subject of his obsession. Now, there are two different stories out there, at least it's being reported in two different ways as to where and how the two met. One reporting says that they met in person at like a video game meetup in December of 2020, but another report said that they met online, not in person, and this is just in a gaming group online in January of 2021. I tend to lean more towards in-person in December of 2020 because there were other articles I read that said that the two had played games in person together a couple of times with a group, and that the group noticed that Kim seemed to pay an awful lot of attention to this girl, seemed very fixated on her, and wanted a romantic relationship. Either way, what we do know is that he became aware of her existence through this video game, and that once he became aware of her, he became interested in her. He thought, you know, she was cute. He wanted to pursue a relationship, but she wasn't down with the sickness. That wasn't something she wanted. So when he brought it to her attention, she was just kind of like, I'm actually kind of good on that. That's not really something I want. Thank you, but no thank you. And he didn't really like this response. And how he reacted isn't clear, but it was enough for her that she was like, okay, that's not really what I want to be dealing with. So she started to distance herself a little bit, not totally cutting him off, but being like, let's just talk a little less. I'm going to back up a little bit. Now, her pulling back a little bit seemed to really piss him off. Like, that sort of rejection wasn't something that he was prepared to deal with or had any interest in dealing with. So he reacted strongly and poorly. And his reaction to her rejection was like more intense than the situation warranted, considering they didn't really know each other that well. I mean, if somebody tells you they're not into you, you really should just move on. It's easier said than done for some people, clearly, but he reacted very poorly. And she was like, okay, whoa, like this is a lot. This is something that I don't need to be dealing with. So it's at this point that she cuts off all contact. She blocks him online, like from the game. She blocks him on social media. She changes her phone number, like everything. She's like, this is done. But of course, that's not where our story ends, because as we so often see in cases like this, he was not taking no for an answer, and he was still able to find ways to communicate with her. You know, making new social media pages. He was able to log into the game that they played together by putting like a different ID in, and he was still monitoring what she did and like where she was and things like that. And he was even able to get this girl's address, which is so scary. But apparently, like in one, I don't know if it was a photo or a video or if it was live, but she showed like a package that she had, or she had a package that was like in the background of her video or photo. And he was able to look at this package and see her address. So from there, he started coming around, hanging out in her neighborhood, just waiting outside to accidentally see her or run into her. Now, this freaked her out, obviously, because can you imagine turning a guy down and then all of a sudden he starts doing this kind of unhinged behavior? He started calling her over and over. He would call her from blocked numbers or payphones. He would send her messages over and over, and then coming around her neighborhood so that she would see him. Like, that's so scary, especially somebody you barely knew, and now all of a sudden they're like in your neighborhood, they're calling you. It's just a lot, and it was a lot for her. She was scared. She told her friend, like, this is incredibly scary for me. I'm seeing him everywhere. And she even started changing up her routes so that she would have less chance of running into him. He did not let up, though. He was obsessed and he was pissed, and that can be a dangerous combination. And in this case it was, because he could see that she was actively avoiding him. He could see that she was going out of her way to get away from him. He could see that she was still getting online and playing with the two's mutual online gaming friends, but not playing with him. And this was unacceptable to him. So after 2 months of relentlessly stalking her, he decided to escalate, and he made a plan to take her life. Well, okay, no. Initially, he said that the plan wasn't to kill her. He just wanted to confront her. But later, we learned that that wasn't the case. His plan all along was to go to her house and murder her. And he very seriously planned this. He planned it at least a week in advance. He went online and he searched for, like, different methods of killing. He searched, like, quote, how to kill people quickly and emergency places to hide. He searched where exactly the carotid artery was so that he could make sure that whoever he was to stab would bleed out quickly. And he went to a store and he stole a knife that he then used in these murders. During his interview to police, he said of this, quote, "After she changed her number and avoided contact with me, I became angry and decided to kill her. That day, I went to a supermarket and stole the weapon." So, he searched what he needed to search. He stole his weapon. He tried to learn all he could about this girl's schedule so that his plan would be successful. Though it turns out he didn't look into it super thoroughly because on this day he thought she was going to be at work and she wasn't going to be at work, so that wasn't great. But despite all of this, he set this plan in motion. So, on March 23rd, 2021, Kim headed to the neighborhood where the girls lived. He entered an internet cafe that was about a mile to a mile and a half, or 220 meters, since this is South Korea, away from the women's apartment. And this was an internet cafe that the eldest daughter, the girl he had become obsessed with, frequented. She had been going there pretty regularly for like several years. Now, we know he was there that day specifically because he was actually caught on surveillance. This video was recovered during, the time that the police were doing the investigation after the murders. And you can actually, see it all play out. Not the murders, but that he was in the neighborhood and then you see him leaving to go, towards their home. He entered the internet cafe wearing a black t-shirt, black pants, and a black hoodie, carrying a backpack. He headed over to a computer, turned it on, and just sat there for about 10 minutes before heading to the smoking room to have a cigarette, which indoor smoking, absolutely not. Woof, that is gnarly to me. But then after finishing his cigarette, he just walked right out the door and headed in the direction of the women's home. He then, it seems, changed his clothes. He brought a change of clothes in his backpack with him, and now he was wearing a disguise. He dressed himself as a delivery person and then went to the apartment door under the guise of delivering a package. So, he knocks on the door. He identifies himself, and the girl inside, which was the younger sister, just yells out to leave the package at the front door. So this wasn't going as expected. They didn't open the door for him. He couldn't just walk in. So he decides to pivot. And he's like, okay, no problem. Cool. Sets the package down. And then, steps to the side and waits silently. After a few minutes, the girl opened the front door to go out and retrieve the package. And this is when she was ambushed. Kim pushed his way into the house and attacked her, stabbing her in the neck, making sure to hit the carotid artery so that she would bleed out quickly, just like he searched online. He then just sat in the home and waited for the older daughter to come home. And after a couple hours at about 9 p.m., he heard somebody coming in the door. He waited, and once they were inside, he attacked. But this too was not the eldest daughter. This was this girl's mother, her unsuspecting mother, just walking into the house. So he attacks her, and just like her daughter, she was stabbed in the throat and she was killed. So now he's in this home. He's killed 2 women that he does not know, and he's just sitting in the house with their bodies waiting for their sister/daughter to come home so he can kill her too. And about an hour later at 10 p.m., she walks in the door to this scene. I cannot even imagine what that would be like, but she's attacked. She's ambushed as soon as she walks in the door. He stabs her in the neck just like he had done her mother and sister, and she too dies. After she was dead, he took her phone. He deleted all evidence of him from her phone. He blocked all of her friends, and he was done. He then just hung out. He hung out in their home for 2 days, sleeping in their beds, drinking their beer and their milk, eating their food, and destroying all evidence that he had ever existed to her in her life, all the stuff off of his phone, her phone, etc. 2 days later, 2 days in that house with these women's bodies, police go to the apartment after receiving a call from the eldest daughter's friend because they hadn't been able to get a hold of her for a few days, and this was weird. So when police arrive at the apartment, it appears that he was able to hear them coming, from the outside. He was able to hear it, and he's like, you know what? My goose is effectively cooked. I'm not going out like this. So he decides he's going to take his own life. So He cuts his wrists, he stabs himself in the stomach, and then he tries to effectively end his life the same way he ended the lives of these women, by stabbing himself in the neck. When police entered the home, they found him there unconscious, suffering from all these wounds, and they also found the bodies of the 3 women, which I cannot even imagine walking into that scene. It sounds like a lot to take in. But he wasn't super successful in, taking his own life, because within 15 minutes he was already up and he was conscious, and he was being taken to the hospital where he would spend several days. While there, laying in the hospital bed, he was questioned by police, and he admitted to everything. He admitted to the murders, and he admitted to the stalking beforehand. So with that, once he was cleared for release from, hospital personnel, he was taken into custody. Now, typically in South Korea, victims of crimes or the people who are arrested for committing violent crimes, which apparently are super rare in South Korea, like compared to other industrialized countries, well, these people, their identities, their photos are not released due to privacy reasons. In this case, though, somebody filed a petition with something called Blue House, and basically, if you were signing this petition, you were wanting the police to release his face, his photo, and his name. They wanted to know who this guy was, and over 200,000 people signed this petition. Now, prior to 2010, this wouldn't have been effective, I don't think, because prior to 2010, there was a law where, this simply wouldn't happen and there were no exceptions, but that appears to have changed in 2009. And that was when the details of a serial killer in South Korea named Kang Ho-sun became known. And ever since that case, the personal details, this is a quote, the personal details of those who commit particularly heinous or violent crimes may be made public under a law that was passed in 2010. So because of this, because of the new law, and because of the petition, there was a meeting with the higher-ups in the Seoul Police Agency, and it was 3 members of the police department and also 4 outsiders, which included academics, lawyers, and people from the media. They all met up and had a little meeting about this. They took into account and considered the meticulous planning of the crime, the evidence that they had against the person, including the murder weapon and forensic evidence collected from the scene, and the brutality of the crime that truly sent shockwaves across the whole country, because this was such an unexpected thing, and this really just doesn't happen there. After 40 minutes, this group decided that yes, they would release his name and they would release his photo, because at this time, nobody had even seen him yet. When he was arrested and when he was paraded in front of the media, he was wearing a mask. So this was going to be the first time anybody saw him. So with that, numerous media outlets released a photo of him, and he looks like an actual child in this photo. And with that, they let the public know that the person responsible for this horribly gruesome crime was a 24-year-old named Kim Tae-Hyun. Now, in his first public appearance since his arrest, he spoke to the media directly, and right away they asked him to take off his mask, and he did, which apparently is a big deal. I don't really understand culturally why, so if you do, please let me know, but it was said to be a big deal that he took off his mask without a problem, and he just kept saying he was sorry. He said he was sorry to the media, and he said that he was sorry that he couldn't answer each of their questions individually, which I just thought was a weird priority, but I don't know. He was asked by one reporter what he would like to say to the family of the victims. And in response to this question, he asked one of the officers that was holding him to let him go. And then he shocked everybody by dropping to his knees and saying, quote, "I feel tremendously guilty for opening my eyes shamelessly, breathing, and even being alive. I would like to apologize for all the damage I have caused everyone, including the bereaved family." This was really all he had to say, though, and every other question he was asked, he didn't really answer. The questions like, why did you kill the women? Did you really stalk the girl? How long were you planning this? To all those questions, he just said over and over, "I'm sorry." But his apologies didn't seem to be received particularly well, and one woman in the crowd even yelled out, quote, "Execute Kim Tae-Hyun, you murderer." It's believed across the board that his apology was not genuine, that it was just lip service to try to get a lesser sentence. Because if he was truly sorry, why would he have, learned her schedule, looked up different ways to murder somebody online, stolen a knife, planned this for a week in advance, and then murdered 3 women? You know what I mean? This wasn't an accident. This was an impulse. This was an ambush 3 times. So let's now get into the trial. The prosecution had a ton to work with. on this case. They were able to show that even though he tried to delete all the information from his phone, digital forensic analysts were able to show the searches he made online, including the exact spots the women would be stabbed. They were also able to show that he had no history of mental illness, but he did have a history of stalking. They also had him in the house with the bodies and his confession, so it wasn't really a question of whether or not he killed them, because he did. The real question at his trial was whether or not all 3 murders were premeditated, because he said that wasn't the case. He did admit that he planned the murder of the daughter, the person he wanted to kill in the first place, but he said that the mother and the other sister just happened and that he didn't even know that they were going to be there. He actually said that the first murder wasn't even intentional. He wasn't even trying to kill her, that he was trying to get her subdued, and that it was an accident. It just happened to hit that exact spot in her neck, right? But the prosecution disagreed. They were like, listen, you planned this a week in advance. You stalked this woman relentlessly. You learned her schedule. You would know who lived in that house, and you would know when she was getting home. And you got there hours before that so that you could kill her family too. In the end, the court rejected Kim's claims that the first 2 murders were not intentional, and he was found guilty on all charges, which included theft, harassment, breaking and entering, misusing communications networks, and murder. The court said in their ruling specifically, quote, "It rightfully makes sense to believe that Kim was determined and planned to murder the whole family until the very last moment." The court then added, quote, "The younger sister and the mother were killed, even though they had nothing to do with the defendant. The crimes show Kim's extreme disregard for human life." The prosecution on this case was requesting the death penalty, saying, quote, "There is no room for consideration of a punishment other than the death penalty." They added that Kim had premeditated the, quote, "ruthless murders," and agreed with the judge, saying that he had an extreme disregard for human life. In the end, though, a now 25-year-old Kim Tae-Hyun was sentenced to life in prison for the 3 premeditated murders of the women. And what's really interesting here is that his stalking, because, he was charged with that as well, in this case was only considered a misdemeanor. But that is something we're going to talk about more in just a little bit. Now, the reason that the court went with life in prison as opposed to the death penalty, or the reasons that they listed, were the fact that Kim had admitted openly to everything that he had done, because so remember, everybody was like, oh, he's just apologizing and admitting, so he gets a lesser sentence, so it seems like that could be true. And they also said that he didn't have a serious criminal record prior to this. The only thing he had a record for was theft and harassment. And on top of that, overall, the death penalty isn't huge in South Korea. I guess they haven't even executed somebody in like 2 decades or something like that. And that's probably because they don't have a lot of extreme violent crimes over there. Now, Kim did make a statement apologizing to the public and to the victims' families, saying that, his heart ached for the victims. But again, people aren't so sure that this is a sincere apology. And even if it was a sincere apology, they didn't really care, because right away they announced that they wanted their attorney to appeal his conviction, or his sentencing, because they believed that he deserved the death penalty. They said that his life sentence was too light, considering he had destroyed an entire family. And as for his attorneys, they said at that time that they weren't sure if they were going to appeal or not. But they clearly changed their minds, because his attorneys did file an appeal in late 2021, and the prosecution followed suit with bringing their case to the appeals court as well, like right after. They're like, fine, you want to go? We'll go too. We were going to go anyway. In the end, though, they both sort of lost, because in January of 2022, the appeals court announced that they were going to uphold his life sentence. So he didn't get a lesser sentence, which is what he wanted, and he didn't get a harsher sentence, which is what the family wanted. And basically, the appeals court said that capital punishment doesn't have any, practical use in their country. And again, as I said, they haven't executed somebody in, I believe it's 25 years, so they weren't going to start now. But they did say that they believe that he should stay in jail for life and that he should never get parole. The court actually insisted that Kim should, quote, stay in isolation to repent for the rest of his life. So that's his situation. Now let's talk about the aftermath a little bit, because due to these murders, there were some changes in the law. So prior to these murders, stalking in the country wasn't really taken seriously. It wasn't given harsh punishments. I mean, look at it. Even in this case where it led to 3 murders, it was only seen as a misdemeanor. It didn't receive harsh penalties at all. And some people, there was a sentiment among people that this stalking was actually an act and an expression of affection. Jang Yoon Mi of the Korea Women's Lawyers Association said that a total of 4,515 stalking cases were reported to police in 1 year, but nearly 90% of them were closed without an investigation because the criteria for punishable stalking is too high. And she added, quote, "Stalking not only causes mental impacts, we should be mindful of the risk of this type of offense escalating. In fact, 3 out of 10 murder cases targeting women in 2019 were committed by stalkers." With that said, since the murders, a bill was passed that would have those who were convicted of stalking serving harsher sentences. So right now that there's a new law, they could serve up to 5 years, where before the max was literally less than a month. And on top of that, if somebody's convicted of stalking, they could receive a hefty fine. So, offenders could be fined anywhere from 30 to 50 million won, depending on whether or not weapons or dangerous objects are used. And that's equivalent to like $25,000 to $35,000, where before the fine would have been 100,000 won, which is literally like $80. So this law was passed the day after Kim committed these murders, but it didn't apply retroactively, so it didn't affect him at all. Now, people are happy to see this law go into effect because apparently it's been in the works for like 20 years. It was first proposed in 1999, so it's actually a little over 20 years, which is crazy that 1999 was over 20 years ago, but they're kind of wondering how effective it's going to be at preventing these crimes and protecting victims, because basically the way the law is written is that if somebody who is being stalked doesn't want to press charges, the police just effectively aren't going to do anything. So experts wonder if this could cause a rise in like violence and blackmailing against people who are being stalked to stop them from pressing charges. Also, apparently in South Korea, a victim isn't able to go to the court themselves and request a protection order. They have to contact the cops, and the cops have to do that for them, which makes the process take longer and keeps them vulnerable longer. Experts also worry because the way the law is written, it basically says that stalking has to be repeated for a while before it's considered criminal, which means that it slows down response time, and they worry that this is a problem because of how fast these things can escalate. Because if we just look at this case alone, they met, and within 2 months, her and her family were murdered. A criminal profiler who looked at this case, his name was Kwon Il-young, I hope to God that was right, said that just like with Kim, planning the crime, finding the position of the carotid artery, and killing these women, he was determined to escalate and end their lives. And he said specifically of Kim and stalkers like him, quote, "When their obsession becomes more serious, the idea I'd rather destroy the victim's life rather than losing the connection with them, their psychology creates a distorted judgment that says, I will own that person even if I have to kill them." And I don't know about you, but to me and everything I've heard, that sounds just like him. And with that, my friends, is the story of Kim Tae-Hyun, the man who killed 3 women from the same family in what the media is calling the most appalling stalking case in the country. I hope you found it to be informative, and I hope my presentation of it made sense, especially since I don't, have the names and I couldn't go into the backstories of these victims. But for what it's worth, I do want to thank you for remembering these 3 women with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. Do you believe that Kim Tae-Hyun should have received the death penalty for these crimes, or do you think life in prison without parole is acceptable? Obviously, that's going to open up the conversation of just if you believe in the death penalty in general, which is definitely a gray area for many people, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Anyways, guys, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down in the suggestion box. No, leave me a comment in the comment section with any cases that you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, so whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage, and I especially want you to start suggesting smaller hometown cases, because since I'm doing 2 cases a week sometimes, I want to reserve those Fridays, I think now, for cases that are smaller, that don't have as much information, so those stories can still be told, right? And I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because again, they're often cases I haven't heard of or need more coverage, and I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us, one of us, one of us, one of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below for your convenience, along with a link to my membership where you get early access to non-sponsored videos, priority comment responses, things like that. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.